the mid-20th century, the city of Boston was strangled by its own arteries. The elevated I-93 highway, a concrete behemoth, choked the city center, cast neighborhoods into darkness, and became a gridlocked monument to bad planning. The solution, unveiled with massive fanfare, was a vision of grandeur, the Big Dig, a multi-billion-dollar subterranean transformation, designed to bury the nightmare and reclaim the heart of one of America's oldest cities. It was initially budgeted at $2.8 billion and projected for completion in just 10 years. But this project would shatter every record, not for its success, but for its sheer, unbelievable failure. The Big Dig ballooned into the most expensive civil engineering blunder in U.S. history, a never-ending nightmare plagued by systemic corruption, contaminated ground, and fatal design flaws. And in 2006, the world saw the deadly price of this negligence when a massive concrete panel, weighing 3 tons, detached from the ceiling. Welcome to the Structural Report. Today, we investigate how ambition turned into the most catastrophic construction disaster of our time. This is the Big Dig, the $22 billion blunder. To understand the magnitude of the Big Dig's failure, we first need to appreciate the audacity of its ambition. In the 1950s, Boston, like many American cities, embraced the interstate highway boom, creating the elevated central artery. While it efficiently moved traffic, it sliced straight through the city's historic heart. This massive structure became known locally as the Green Monster, not just for its color, but for the constant gridlock it created. By the 1980s, the highway was operating at 4 times its designed capacity, causing daily, paralyzing congestion. The structural integrity of the nearly 40-year-old elevated highway was also rapidly deteriorating. Engineers estimated that by the 1990s, the only viable solution would be to tear it down and replace it, a measure that would have crippled the city's traffic for years. This is where the vision for the Big Dig was born. The core idea was revolutionary and terrifyingly complex: to build a new, much larger underground network of tunnels directly beneath the existing, operating elevated highway. Essentially, building a massive freeway underground while traffic continued to flow just feet above the construction zone. The project had 3 monumental goals. Firstly, to replace the crumbling elevated artery with the new, multi-lane underground tunnels, drastically improving traffic flow through the downtown area. Secondly, to build the crucial Ted Williams Tunnel beneath Boston Harbor, connecting the city to its airport and opening up a completely new transportation corridor. And finally, the jewel in the crown: once the old elevated road was gone, the city would gain back almost 300 acres of prime downtown land, transforming it into parks and public spaces, collectively known as the Rose Kennedy Greenway. It was an undertaking of staggering size, complexity, and cost, initially projected at $2.8 billion. The Big Dig wasn't just construction, it was urban surgery. When ground broke in 1991, the public was sold a promise. The chaos would be temporary, and the reward would be the birth of a modern Boston. No one, however, could foresee that the Big Dig would become a textbook example of everything that could go wrong with a mega project. The Big Dig was doomed by an unholy trinity of failures: faulty design, catastrophic material defects, and relentless mismanagement. The moment the excavators broke ground in 1991, the clock started ticking on what would become a 20-year stream of errors. The first failure, the leaking tunnels daardoor the Ein. Biggest early technical challenge was building the tunnels while keeping the hundreds of surrounding historic buildings standing. Engineers used a technique called slurry wall construction, where massive concrete walls were built underground before any soil was excavated. This was revolutionary, but inherently risky. The major tunnel sections, including the crucial Ted Williams Tunnel, began leaking almost immediately. Water was everywhere. The sheer volume of leaks was far beyond what was tolerable, often pouring in at a rate of 20 to 30 gallons per minute. This was not a minor waterproofing issue. It was a fundamental defect in the tunnel's structure and sealants. The constant need for repairs meant millions were spent simply draining and patching structures that were barely a decade old. The second failure: systemic corruption and cost overruns. While the tunnels were leaking, the project's budget was hemorrhaging. The initial $2.8 billion budget quickly doubled, then tripled, then quintupled. Part of the cost escalation was due to the immense complexity of digging beneath a fully functional city. requiring constant, expensive rerouting of utilities and unexpected geological surprises. However, the greater failure was the management. Investigations later revealed rampant mismanagement, lack of oversight, and an atmosphere where accountability simply vanished. Contractors charged for work not performed. Change orders were approved without scrutiny. By the time the final bill came in, the project's costs had spiraled to an unprecedented $22 billion, a textbook example of runaway government spending. The third failure, the fatal ceiling collapse, the most shocking and tragic chapter occurred after the tunnels were supposedly complete. The worst design flaw was hidden in plain sight. Above the traffic, the tunnel's ceiling panels. In the connector tunnels, tons of concrete ceiling panels were suspended from the roof with steel rods, secured using a heavy-duty epoxy adhesive. Engineers were under pressure to meet deadlines, and this method was faster than traditional mechanical bolting. However, the team responsible for the ceiling design failed to account for a critical engineering principle: creep. Over time, the epoxy adhesive would slowly deform under the constant, immense weight of the concrete panels. On July 10, 2006, this design flaw turned deadly. A 3-ton concrete panel in the I-90 tunnel connector sheared from its mountings, crashing onto a passing vehicle and killing a passenger. The tragedy exposed the structural instability that permeated the entire project. Investigations found thousands of similar fasteners throughout the tunnels were under tremendous stress and at risk of catastrophic failure. The structural integrity of the Big Dig had officially collapsed, both literally and figuratively. The catastrophic collapse in 2006 shattered public confidence and triggered the largest criminal investigation into a construction project in U.S. history. The Big Dig was no longer just an engineering problem. It was a criminal liability. Following the death in the I-90 tunnel, prosecutors launched a massive probe. The tragedy proved that the initial cost overruns and delays were not just bureaucratic mishaps. They were symptoms of profound and dangerous negligence in design and execution. The state charged the epoxy supplier and initiated widespread civil proceedings. The primary general contractor, the joint venture of Bechtel Parsons Brinkerhoff, which oversaw the entire project, eventually paid out hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements to avoid criminal charges and ongoing civil lawsuits. The total amount paid in litigation and settlement fees surpassed $500 million, money that could have been used for public infrastructure elsewhere. But the most staggering figure remains the final price tag. From an initial conservative estimate of $2.8 billion, the final construction cost, including all repairs, legal fees, and mitigation efforts, soared past the $22 billion mark. To put that into perspective, the International Space Station, built by 5 space agencies across 15 countries, cost roughly $150 billion over 30 years. The Big Dig, a single 1.5-mile stretch of underground highway, consumed nearly 15% of that colossal figure. The cost per mile made it, at the time, the most expensive highway construction project ever conceived. But beyond the financial ledger, the project carried a deep cultural and political cost. It forever changed how megaprojects are handled in America. New oversight boards were implemented, and the public became inherently skeptical of any large-scale infrastructure promise. The Big Dig became the perpetual example cited whenever a budget was proposed for a new tunnel or bridge. It turned the phrase, "cost overrun," into a permanent fixture of political discourse. Despite the astronomical costs and the human tragedy, the Big Dig did achieve its primary goal. The massive congestion was relieved, and the Rose Kennedy Greenway, a beautiful stretch of parks, now sits where the ugly elevated highway once stood. But the question remains, was the benefit worth the price? Here's the final voiceover script. In English, final voiceover script: the catastrophic collapse in 2006 shattered public confidence and triggered the largest criminal investigation into a construction project in U.S. history. The Big Dig was no longer just an engineering problem. It was a criminal liability. The epoxy supplier was charged, and the primary general contractor, Bechtel Parsons Brinkerhoff, paid hundreds of millions in settlements. The final construction price, including all repairs and legal fees, soared past the $22 billion mark. To put that into perspective, this single 1.5-mile stretch of underground highway consumed nearly 15% of the total estimated cost of the International Space Station. Despite the astronomical price and the human tragedy, the Big Dig did achieve its primary goal. The massive congestion was relieved, And the Rose Kennedy Greenway, a beautiful stretch of parks, now sits where the ugly elevated highway once stood. But the project left a bitter cultural legacy. It became a perpetual, defining example of negligence and runaway spending. The question remains, was the ultimate benefit truly worth the ultimate price?